Alright, it looks like this is somewhat in order. I guess Asylum Demon is a perfect start to this. I'd say Asylum Demon for the tutorial boss that's basically just there to teach you the basics of dodging. Pretty good. I think it's a pretty good introduction to what bosses are like. Bell Gargoyle, the first gang fight. Pretty good fight as well. I think the boss arena is really interesting. I say for a lot of players it's going to be very difficult your first playthrough, just because you're not going to know how to deal with 2 different bosses at once. I think it's good they throw this at you early on, because it's basically a warm-up for what's going to be happening to you later in the game when you run to ONS. I think the fight itself is pretty good. Capra Demon, bro, this boss is so whack. This boss is so easy. The only reason this boss is somewhat difficult is because it's in a tiny little box room and they throw in 2 little dogs to mess with you. If those 2 dogs were not in the room, this fight would be a breeze. But these 2 dogs, the second you walk in, immediately try to bite you and try to stun you so the Capra Demon can get a cheap shot. Because let me tell you something, on his own, he is not a threat. Kinda stinky. Ceaseless Discharge is really interesting. Fight is going to go one of 2 ways. Either you're going to fight him man-to-man, and it's going to be a somewhat drawn-out fight where you're going to have to wait for him to throw out his attacks, and then you got to punch him for it, or you're going to be shooting him with magic from afar, yada yada yada. Or you're just going to run back to the fog wall, and then he's going to jump after you. You're going to hit his hand, and he's going to die instantly. But I think just for the fact that there's 2 completely different methods of beating him, I think it's kind of neat, so I'll put an average. Centipede Demon. It's not a bad fight by any means. I mean, it's basically just this dude shooting you with his long neck while you try to chop it off so you can get the ring, so you can run out and fight him, or you just wait for him to come to land and then you beat him up there. Either way, he's not that interesting to me, but I don't know, I'm just gonna put him in meh, because that's how I feel about him. He's kind of meh. Chaos Witch Quelaag. The chick has been having men act up for the last 10 years. I think she's pretty sick, and is one of the few bosses in like the first half of the game that actually has a good amount of health and defense. Like most Dark Souls 1 bosses, once you know all of her different moves, she's not that much of a threat, and she's in a really interesting boss arena. Not to mention you get to fight her with the girl herself, Maneater Mildred, so I mean, it's a pretty cool fight. I like it a lot. Crossbreed Priscilla. I wish this fight was more interesting. This boss visually is so cool, the music is dope, the boss arena is great. How you get there is sick. Everything about this fight, except for actually fighting her, is super neat, because basically the fight just comes down to she turns invisible for a second, you find her footprints, you hit her, she's not invisible, and then you just hit her a few more times. She's got very low health. She's not hard to beat, but she looks cool, and I wish there was more to do with her. To be fair, you don't have to kill her, she's optional, but you get an achievement for killing her. So you gotta. As much as I'd love to put her in really gosh darn good, this is an average fight. You could even argue meh, because it's not that great, but everything about her, besides actually fighting her, is really cool. Dark Sun Gwyndolin. Every Soulsborne game has to have some gimmick fights, and so this is one of the ones in the first Dark Souls. Really boring. He has 3 different projectiles, and he just shoots them at you while you dodge him and run down a hallway. You get to him, you hit him, he teleports away, rinse, repeat until it's over. He's really boring. He's really, really boring. But I mean, at least it's different. But the fight itself's pretty whack, so I'm gonna put that in meh. Demon Fire Sage. So, for some reason, of all the bosses they decided to reuse, they chose the Asylum Demon, which the first time you fight him is fine because it's like a tutorial boss. Second time, we'll get to. But the third time, I don't know why they decided to bring it back a third time though. Second if you don't fight the Stray Demon, but even still, the Demon Fire Sage is literally just the Stray Demon, but now he's on fire. I don't know, it's a whack fight. It's super easy. You just go behind him, and you bait him, he does the same AoE over and over, or he does the butt stomp. Either way, super simple fight, not interesting. And honestly, just because it's the third time you see him, that's kind of a stinky boss. 4 Kings. Okay, I love the 4 Kings. So this is one of the few bosses in the entire series at this point that still stresses me out. Every single time I'm running through this game, I'm thinking pretty much the entire first half of the game, regardless of what build I'm doing, regardless of what weapon I'm using, I'm thinking about the whole time, am I going to be able to do enough damage to take on the 4 Kings easily? Because if you are not doing enough damage by the time you reach them, this fight is gonna suck. Like, these dudes by themselves aren't that bad. As soon as you're taking too long to where a second king spawns in, it's a nightmare. That said though, the fight itself is pretty sick. One of the coolest arenas in the whole franchise, and it's literally just a void. But that's why it's cool. I love this fight. I think it's top tier. It's one of my favorites in the series. Super sick. I don't know why I'm drawn to fights that stress me out, but I love fights that are a challenge. Gaping Dragon. Who named this boss? This boss sucks. So if you fight him up close and stay by him the whole time, his legs and his charge attack can one-shot you easily early game. Or you do the smart thing to where you just run in front of him, bait him to do his charge, hit him after he's done, and then he turns around and does it again, rinse, repeat till he's dead. Super easy fight. It's really simple. Unless you forget to kill the channeler on the way to the fight, in which case the channeler will shoot you while you're in it, and that can make it a little bit more difficult. But other than that, the boss is kind of meh. It's a pretty meh fight. Great Wolf Sith, let's go! This is one of my favorite bosses in any game, and to be honest, Ciath himself is not even a hard fight. There are very few fights in video games I would say are iconic, but Ciath has got to be one of them. Ciath is just so memorable. It's just such a neat encounter. I still think about the theme just randomly from time to time, and just the fact that they really try to guilt you by making it to where when Ciath is about to die, he starts limping, which is so unnecessary. Like, just that extra layer of like, hey yo, you really killing this animal. Yeah, real cool, dog. Anyway, I love Ciath. Super cool. Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, the final boss. Gwyn is either going to be an absurd challenge for you, or he's going to be one of the easiest bosses in the game. It just depends on how you decide to fight him. You're either going to fight him like a man, or you're going to do what most people do, and you just parry him to death. And I'm going to be honest, I always just parry him to death. As soon as I figured out you could do that my first playthrough, I've never gone back. It's too easy. He just gets in a loop. If you don't parry him, he has crazy fast sword swings that are high damaging, long range. Like he's a monster. But then you find out you can parry him to death, and he's a noob! He's a scrub! I literally did a level 1 run of this game. I didn't level up a single time, and he was one of the easiest bosses in the game because I just parried him! A crazy powerful boss with an extraordinarily critical weakness. But besides that, the arena's cool, fighting Gwyn himself is pretty neat, and the music is god tier, so I'm still gonna say it's really gosh darn good. Iron Golem is kinda weird. Iron Golem's a pretty simple fight too. There's a giant right before this boss room, and if you don't kill it, he'll throw explosive boulders at you the whole time. So that makes it pretty interesting, but if you kill him, the fight's really simple. You basically chop this man's legs. He either just stumbles over, falls in his butt, and you beat him to death, or he stumbles over and falls off the bridge and instantly dies. Either way, he's pretty average. Moonlight Butterfly is visually awesome. The music is great. A really simple fight though. This boss fight is literally dodge its projectiles till it lands on the bridge, hit it a few times till it flies back up, rinse, repeat. Really simple, but the music and the visuals I think carry really hard, so I'll still put it in average. Gravelord Nito is one of the most disappointing bosses I think I've ever encountered in a game. I swear this man was hyped up so much, and then you fight him and he's so simple. The only thing that makes this fight even remotely difficult are his little skeletons running around, and even then, they ain't that bad. Literally, if you stand right in front of this man and attack him, a lot of his attacks from his sword will go right over your head. Like literally, this man has trouble hitting you if you are point blank range. Like he just cannot hit you most of the time. I'm gonna put him in meh, because I still think he's kinda neat visually, but like the fight's really easy. Ornstein and Smough. Okay, these guys are literally just, they're not even just top tier bosses in this game. This is a top tier Souls boss. Most of the bosses in this game generally are pretty simple, all things considered, especially compared to later games, but I still think Ornstein and Smough, pretty tough fight in general. And I genuinely think the Bell Gargoyle is basically just a warm-up for the Ornstein and Smough fight. Super cool that you have a really quick, agile boss matched with a really slow, heavy-hitting one. And together they're just a nightmare. They cover each other really well. Not to mention, it's one of the few boss fights in this game that has a second phase, where when you beat one of them, the other one basically uses the power of the dead one's corpse to transform. And depending on which one you beat, changes the second phase of the fight. And then basically whichever one you kill in the second phase, you get their boss armor. Like, it's super cool. Super neat fight. Love them. And the music is great. And fighting them in the big, like, golden arena of Honorlando. And then you beat them, and you get to meet Guinevere, and you get the Lord Vessel, and everything about it's just great. Top tier fight. I'd actually put it in front of Ciath and Four Kings. I'm convinced Pinwheel is a meme. I feel like enough jokes have been said about how easy Pinwheel is. I mean, this boss literally, by the time you reach him, assuming you wait till late game to fight him, you're gonna kill this dude in probably like, maybe 3 hits. Most of the time, this dude will not make it more than 10 seconds. Like, horrible. Although I will say, and I don't think a lot of people know this, if you have not, go listen to his full boss theme on YouTube, because this dude's theme is a banger, and most people don't know this because he dies so quick. But besides his theme, he's kind of stinky. He's pretty whack. Seath the Scaleless. So, I really feel like all the 4 late game bosses, except for Four Kings, are like not great. Again, super cool visually, and the music's pretty good. But like, this boss is annoying, dude. His tails are huge, and they cover so much of the arena. And the arena, by the way, is not big enough for this man. It looks like it is until you try to get around him, in which case, oh my god. If you somehow get behind Ciath and you start flailing his tails, pray to god you have enough room to get away. There's sometimes where you're like trapped in a spot in that arena where you just like cannot avoid his tail swipes. And this fight is made so much worse if you're trying to cut off his hind tail and get the Moonlight Greatsword, which, that's my favorite weapon. So anytime I want to get that, I have to go cut off his tail, which, holy crap, is obnoxious trying to do that. But regardless, forget the Moonlight Greatsword. He's just not great in general. He has those attacks, and then he like will cover the entire ground in crystals to like insta-kill you with curse. Whatever. The point is, he's not great. But at least he looks cool. He's pretty meh for me. Stray Demon. So unlike the demon Fire Sage, I actually don't mind the Stray Demon. First off, I love the way you run into the Stray Demon, where you're just going back to the Asylum and then you fall through the floor and find like the stronger variant of the Asylum Demon is pretty sick. Assuming you're fighting him in like the early half of Dark Souls, he actually can be a decent challenge at that time, unless you understand that if you go behind him, he'll literally get in like an endless loop of doing the same 2 attacks, and then in which case he's not a challenge at all. But if you don't know that, he can actually be kind of an interesting encounter. So unlike the Demon Fire Sage, I actually kind of like the harder version of the first boss. So I actually don't mind him. I think he's an average boss. The Demon Fire Sage is the problem. There was no reason for him to come back a 3rd time. Taurus Demon. Wow, I'm surprised we haven't got the Taurus Demon yet. So Taurus Demon is actually not too different from Asylum Demon. The difference here is where you fight him. Asylum Demon is like a big open space. Taurus Demon is on a thin bridge where you barely have enough room to dodge past him. There's a couple of Archer Hollows you can go kill to make the fight a little easier beforehand, and that might be the only thing you don't do the first time. It'll catch you off guard during the fight. But, I don't know, pretty simple fight. Average. So, I'm actually not going to go in depth on the Bed of Chaos. As you can see, I already have a tier prepared for it. Worst boss in the franchise, one of the worst bosses in any game, period. It's literally an obstacle course in a game that is not built for an obstacle course. Not even worth deep discussion. So now we're just left with the DLC bosses. So as is basically tradition in the Souls games, a lot of the best bosses are always in the DLC. In fact, I would say all 4 of the bosses that show up in the DLC are like some of the best. Artorias The Abysswalker is top 3 bosses in the entire franchise for me, and he's easily my favorite in this game. I literally have a poster of this guy in my bedroom. I think he's awesome in every way, not just like the actual fight against him, which is a really cool one-on-one duel in like a coliseum, which I just think is sick. The theme is great, obviously. This boss has such sick lore behind him. I'm not going to go in depth right now, but Artorias is just one of the most memorable characters in the franchise for me, and I think he's super sick. This guy does flips and dips, and his boss weapon allows you to do those flips and dips. Artorias is top tier, my favorite boss in this game. Super sick. Black Dragon Kalameet. This boss is the only boss my entire first playthrough that I genuinely kind of rage quit against. My first playthrough, it took me 2 hours to beat the 4 kings. And even then, I didn't mind it that much. I thought they were sick, right? The process of figuring out how to beat the 4 kings I thought was fun, and I enjoyed it. That goes with pretty much every boss in this game for the most part, except for Bed of Chaos. But Black Dragon Kalameet, like, pushed me to my limit. I could not stand this boss. The amount of attempts it took me, I could not even articulate. However, I will say, since my first playthrough, I've never had that much trouble with this boss again. And I think it's just because it took me so many times to beat Black Dragon Kalameet the first time, that every move this dragon has is ingrained in my head by such a ridiculous degree that it can't surprise me anymore. That said, my bias aside, it's a pretty good fight. it's pretty good. Manus, Father of the Abyss, I think most people would agree that this is the hardest fight in the game. It's either this boss or Kalameet, or some people say Ornstein and Smough. But I think Manus is definitely the hardest boss in this game. Dude hits like a truck, has a huge amount of different attacks, which is not normal for Dark Souls 1. A lot of different swipes, hits with his staff, he's got spells. This dude's crazy. He's got a ton of health to back it up. Even now, when I go back to Dark Souls, it usually takes me a few attempts, at least. Except for that one playthrough where I had the Darkwood Grain Ring and the Golden Tracer, and I just decimated him in 30 seconds. Not really sure how that happened. I also think he's just pretty cool in general. I'll put him in top tier. I really like this fight. And last, we have the Sanctuary Guardian. Funnily enough, this is the one boss in this game I always forget about. I literally just forget this boss exists. And I think it's actually a pretty good introduction to the DLC. I think it's just pretty sick visually, shooting it flying around and shooting like lightning at you and stuff. And then you can chop off his tail and get a whip, which whips are garbage in Dark Souls 1. But it's still cool you can get a weapon, which you can also get a weapon by chopping off the Bell Gargoyle and the Gaping Dragon's tails, but besides the point. The point is, a pretty cool fight, and I'd actually say it's a pretty gosh darn good fight. I'd say it's above average, and that would probably be how I rank these. I think that's pretty fair. But the too long, didn't watch version would be Artorias' best boss, Bed of Chaos is garbage. Have a good night.